All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And it's time. I have already gone through the PowerPoint presentations for the textbook you see in front of you, JavaScript 6th edition by Sasha Vodnik and Don Gosselin. All right, so since I've gone through those already, this is the table of contents from the book. Chapter 1 is an introduction to JavaScript. Chapter 2, working with functions, data types, and operators. Chapter 3, building arrays and controlling flow. Chapter 4, debugging and error handling. Chapter 5, working with a document object model, the DOM. Chapter 6, enhancing and validating forms. Let me stop right there and tell you, we are covering every one of those chapters in the class. All right? I am not planning on covering Chapter 7, which talks about using object-oriented JavaScript. I already did go over the PowerPoints. That presentation is out there. We are going to go over in class manipulating data in strings and arrays. I'm not going to go into class. There probably just won't be time to go over these 3 chapters, but we will go over an introduction to jQuery. So why am I telling you all that? Because basically what I've done is I've written a bunch of iterations of programs for these chapters right here and for this chapter right here. So that's what I'm going to start doing with you right now. Now, the examples that I'm giving, it's very simple. It's a little miles per gallon program. Not much of an interface. All right, there really isn't much to it, as you can see. But well, you know, right now I'm about to write the JavaScript file for you, so it doesn't do much. This is going to be the interface for virtually every one of the chapters until we get to about chapter 5 or 6. Then we'll create a form. But so for chapter 2, it'll say V2, chapter 2, etc. All right. So what I'd like to do then is to start writing the JavaScript. So again, this is just simple. This is all, the whole thing, the whole HTML file is shown right here. That's it. So you see there's not much in here. Not only that, the CSS file is also unbelievably small. That's it. Well, let's open it up in here. I changed the background color to aqua, the font family to Arial, and for the button, I gave it a different background color. Actually, I just gave it a background color of black. I don't even know if that worked. The color is white, and I've got this border radius and margin left. Okay? None of that stuff is really important in the mainstream of things. But if we look in here, this file is going to end up being script.js. So let's save that right away. So file, save as. I've already written this, but I've got script0.js. So I'm just going to put it in here as script.js. And there it is. So this is version 1 of a simple JavaScript miles per gallon program. The inputs will be miles driven. And notice that here's our requirements. The miles driven must be between 1 and 1,000. Those are arbitrary values I made up. We've got gallons used, another arbitrary value which must be between 1 and 50. The output will be our miles per gallon, which is going to be our miles driven. So let's say we put in 300 divided by our gallons used. Let's say we put in 10. That would mean our miles per gallon would be 30. Again, as this is version 1, there is no error checking that's going to be done in this program. So not only is it fairly easy to break it, I'm going to break it for you and show you what it looks like when it's broken. So to kind of give you a glimpse into my world, this is how I typically write things. So I'm first going to have my program constants, and I have about a half dozen of those. Now, const is an interesting word. Const means that what comes next is going to be a constant. So I'm going to have min miles, and I'm going to set that equal to 1. Well, I don't know what I did there. Equal to 1. All right, and I'll put a comment there that says minimum miles driven. Well, if I'm going to have a minimum miles, probably would make sense. I would have a maximum miles. Oops. And that is going to be 1,000. So that will be the maximum miles driven. Now, I don't need what I'm about to put in here, but I'm going to put def miles for default miles. I'm not going to use that in this program, but I will use that in later programs. So the fewest miles someone can drive in our program will be 1. The maximum miles, or the most miles somebody can drive in the program, will be 1,000. And what will happen is if they put in a value that's less than 1, or a value that's greater than 1,000, or a value that's non-numeric, we'll just reset it to 200. All right, that's all stuff that we're going to do. For now, we're not, in this program, we're not doing any error handling. So, not only do we want to do this, we want to do gallons. I guess I'll move all that over. So I'm going to have min gallons. I'm going to have max gallons. And I'm going to have def gallons. And going by our requirements. So 1 in 1,000 were our miles. 1 in 50 are our gallons. So this is going to be 1, and that's fine. This is going to be a 50. And our default, again, I arbitrarily just set that to 10. All right. So this will change to gallons used. So I now have all 6 of my constants. My minimum miles that you can possibly drive, the maximum miles that you can possibly drive, the default miles to be driven. So if it doesn't fall within that range, you'll get this. Not right away, but you'll get that in just a couple minutes. All right. Then we do the same thing with gallons. The minimum gallons you can put in, the maximum gallons you can put in, and if you don't put in a number between 1 and 50, the default gallons that you'll get. All right. Now, I tried writing this using good programming practices. You may or may not agree with my programming practices, but one thing I'm doing is I'm putting in a lot of comments. So this is the program driver. All right, this is going to be main. For the first iteration of this program, and that's for the first iteration only. It will house all of the code. All right. Now, in the JavaScript programming language, you can name functions anything you want. In other programming languages, the first function that you write, that gets the program started, so to speak, is called main. So that's why I use this. So again, I'm going to keep commenting here. Input miles driven should be 1 through 1,000. Again, should be that. Doesn't mean it's going to be that. All right, now I could put in this var miles driven equal parse int prompt. Again, I'm going to change this in just a minute. Input miles driven between 1 and 1,000. And we can put in a default value there. Let's just put in 200. All right. Now, I can run the program as it is. It's not going to do much of anything, but I just want to show you. Okay, what doesn't it like? Main not defined. Main. Well, it doesn't like something in here. I'll have to check out and see what that is. Function main. I think the problem is, nope, that's not the problem. Well, the bottom line is this, that might be what the problem is. Let's see. Okay, so there we go. Input miles driven between 1 and 1,000. Now I can click OK and nothing's going to happen because I haven't put any more code in there yet. But what is important is, as I keep running this program, maybe I want to change those values. So I'm hard coding the values in here and here. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is, rather than typing in 1, 1,000, and 200, I'm going to grab the values from here. All right? It means that I've got to do a little bit more work, but that's no biggie. So I'm just going to change this to input miles driven between and I'll put here min miles and max miles. All right. Whoops, I don't want that in double quotes. So now let's see how it changed. Now you remember what it looked like just a second ago when we ran this. All right. Whoop, wrong one. This is what it looked like when we ran it previously. Okay. Now I want to run it again. Let's make, I've saved. Okay. So I'm going to come back and run the program again. Notice input miles driven between 1 and 1,000, but now it's grabbing those values and it's grabbing them from my constants. And I did not put in a default value. So we can put in that default value too. All right, not hard. All we do is we add to that, comma, def miles. All right, let's run this again. You saw what happened when we just ran it. There was no default in there. But now we're going to run it again. And now we've got our default value of 200. Now we still haven't done anything with this, but all I'm trying to get across to you is the fact that we have now gone in and instead of hard coding our values here, here, and here, we instead used the values of the constants here, here, and here. All right. Well, sometimes being a decent, a good programmer, I don't consider myself a great programmer. I like to consider myself a good programmer, is knowing and not doing way too much work. So there's miles driven. Let's change this here to gallons used. Again, that should be between 1 and 50. This will become gallons used. And again, now we can use our other three, min gallons, max gallons, and def gallons. So this changes to gallons. This changes to gallons. And this changes to gallons. Now notice if I run the program, it comes in, it asks me for my miles driven, and it asks me for my gallons used. And again, it's grabbing the 1, the 50, and the 10 from our constants. All right, we're not done yet. There's really not much to do anymore. We're almost done with this first iteration, but I'm trying to build it very piecemeal to show you exactly what goes into this. So now I should have my input values. I should have my miles driven. I should have my gallons used. All right, so what do I want to do now? var means I'm creating a variable. MPG, which is my miles per gallon, which is simply miles driven divided by gallons used. Now, I could run the program again, but I'm not printing anything out, so you're not going to see any difference between this iteration and the one that I just did previously. So let's just put an alert up here. And we'll say miles driven plus miles driven plus, and then we're going to put a line break in here. Whoops. Holy. Gallons used. And then finally, our MPG. And when we do our MPG, we're going to make it look a little nicer. What do I mean by that? We're going to say MPG dot to fixed, which means put it to 2 decimal places. That's it for our program. Now let's save it, and we'll go back and talk about it in just a minute. So let's run this. So notice if I put in valid values, so I'm going to keep the 200, I'm going to keep the 10, and it tells me my miles per gallon was 20, which is correct. The program right now has no error checking, so if I leave this blank, and I leave this blank, I get NaN, which means not a number for all of my fields. Not only that, I can also run it, and I can put in negative 34, all right, 10, and it tells me my miles per gallon is a negative 3.4. So there is literally no error checking in this program right now. That's not what's important. What's important is that you understand we created a simple HTML file with virtually nothing in it but a H1 header and a button. We said that when the button runs, we want to run the main function, which is what's in here. So in our main function, again, there's a big comment, and in our main function, we first set up 6 constants. All right, a minimum miles you can drive, which was 1, a maximum miles you could drive, which was 1,000, a default miles, so if you don't put in a value between 1 and 1,000, it will eventually be reset to 200. A minimum gallons you can put in your tank, which is 1, a maximum gallons you can put in your tank, which is 50, and if you don't put in a value between 1 and 50, it will default to 10. Then we wrote our driver, so everything was in main. It's not a big file or a big function, 34 to 52. It's about 20 lines. And there's blank lines in here. All right, and there's comments in here. So again, it's closer to 15 lines. So we first inputted our miles driven, and we gave the user a nice prompt message, and we used our values from our three constants to fill that up. Then we input our gallons used, and again, we used our three constants to provide the user with a nice prompt message. Then we did our simple calculation, which was to divide our miles driven, which we inputted there, by our gallons used, which we inputted there. Again, if we put in something non-numeric or out of range, the program does what it can with it. If either or both the miles driven or the gallons used are out of range, that value will then get NaN for not a number, and the calculation will also get a value of NaN. Then we did a simple alert where we printed out or echoed back the value for miles driven, the value for gallons used, and the value for miles per gallon, which we fixed to 2 decimal places. We can fix all three of these if we want to 2 decimal places. There's absolutely no problem at all doing that. So if we did that, just so you see it, because I'm done with this first iteration, now if I come through here and I put in 500, and let's say we used 20 gallons. Now notice all of them are set to 2 decimal places, which is fine also. So I hope that you got something out of going through this first example. All right? So that was meant, again, to coordinate with the introduction to JavaScript. So as I get these done, I'm going to bold them and change the color. I'm going to change it to green. All right, so I'm going to come back in a minute, and we're going to break this down into functions. So I'm going to modularize this program in Chapter 2. I'll be back with that lecture in just a couple minutes.